I don't take nothing that a doctor don't prescribe. I just take Paxil, Xanax, Zoloft, Flomax, morphine, Valtrex, Flonase, Plavix, codeine, Zyrtec, Zoma, Zantac, Ultram, Zocor, Zipro, Prozac, dopamine, Demerol, Lexapro, Tylenol, Vicodin, Lyrica, Lipitor, and Adderall, but I don't do no drugs, man.
Hi everyone, it's Dr. Beard, joined again by my husband, Paul. And today we are continuing to talk about the fundamentals podcast series. Today we're going to talk about protein.
Yep.
Protein is one of the quote macros of our diets, and it's important. And I feel that many people aren't getting sufficient amounts of quality protein, and many have fallen for this whole plant-based protein business
Agenda
to the detriment of their body. So first of all, let's talk about the functions of protein. Okay, protein is a nutrient your body needs to grow and repair cells. Okay, proteins in the body catalyze virtually all chemical reactions. For reactions to take place, these proteins act as catalysts. Proteins regulate gene expression. They comprise the major structural elements of all of your cells. They regulate the immune system. They form the major constituents of muscle. Proteins impact every facet of your body's functions.
and they taste good and they have a lot of satiety.
Yes, they do.
They stick with you.
And there's various different, there's different types of protein. All protein is not the same. Proteins are, antibodies are proteins, contractile proteins, enzymes, hormonal proteins, structural proteins, storage proteins, transport proteins. So proteins are serving many, many roles in the body. And any protein in the human body can be created from permutations of only 20 amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. Proteins are broken down into amino acids in the body. And some of these amino acids are called essential amino acids, meaning you must consume them. It is essential that you eat them because the body can't make these amino acids. There are a wide variety of sources of amino acids and protein in the diet. Animal proteins, of course, right? Beef, fish, dairy products, poultry, eggs, wild game, pork, you name it. That's a source of protein. Of course, you can get protein from plant sources as well. Vegetables, grains, nuts, legumes, seeds, they also have proteins. But the protein that you consume that comes from animal sources, it's much more bioavailable. The body can utilize it much more easily, and it's a complete protein. Quality matters greatly. Plants provide incomplete protein. So you kind of have to mix and match certain vegetables to form a complete protein. And even then, it's just not as bioavailable as the protein that you would find in animal sources, which has been getting, just like with cholesterol and fat, animal protein is also being demonized.
Mm-hmm.
This whole thing about, getting away from beef and things like that, because it's destroying the planet or whatever,
Well, every time they do that comparison, they show the bad type of beef, which is the production, corn-fed feedlots, horrible humanity,
yes,
stressed animals. They don't show the pasture-raised grass
right
in the
like we have in our fields in front of the house.
They're
right
so
now.
Happy. They're not stressed at all.
They come running up to us when we're
right.
Yeah,
And then when
they're happy,
and when they're dispatched, they're killed humanely.
right.
They always want to show the worst case scenario, which we should be getting away from. All animals should be treated with dignity. But to compare that and say, oh, the plant-based is superior, it's not a fair comparison. It's an agenda-driven. They're trying to sell a product.
I know. When we drive through Kansas and we see all the, you can smell it before you get to it, the big cattle lots. And it's just, all those cows in that
It's so
one.
sad.
It is so sickening to me when I drive by it because those animals are just so stressed from being in that environment. But anyway, so let's talk about the different types of animal proteins first and how you really need to source them so that you're getting the highest quality animal protein. So let's talk about beef first. We just mentioned that. Your beef needs to be grass-fed.
It needs to be grass-fed. It needs to be raised in a stress-free environment, and it needs to be killed humanely. The last one's the hardest one because right now it's difficult to find small slaughterhouses. Ideally, they would come to the farm, which would be zero stress, but that's something that we need to change, not get rid of cattle.
Right.
So if we can grass-fed them from birth to slaughter, ideally slaughter on site, compost the remains, then we have a really complete, very sustainable model. So there's some work to be done with it, but you can find good grass-fed beef, and it is really good and healthy. And the omega-3s are very high in it. Most people think that beef is not rich in omega-3s, but grass-fed is. I had a friend who raised buffalo in Colorado. She was a large producer. She was trying to make a small fortune by starting with a large one, but she was a wonderful person. But she spent money to do the study, and she showed that how quickly the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio changed when they were put on grain. It happened within a month.
Wow.
And so,
quick.
Yes. So the whole idea of I'm going to pasture raise them, but I'm going to finish them with corn.
It's like you just defeated everything you've worked for.
Yeah, it's better than
strictly corn-fed.
Right. And, depending on where you are, like here in Arkansas, there are only a few places that have good grass-fed beef because the quality of our grass is not that high. So it really depends. If you're in Kentucky, you could probably raise really good. Colorado. So it depends on the quality of the grass and the variety of grasses. We are what we eat eats. So a cow that's eating Bermuda grass and Bahia, it's hard to get a really good tasting. It's good when we eat it, but it's not as good as, say, something that's eating the orchard grass, smooth brome, a lot of legumes, things like that. So it takes a little work to find those.
But they're out there, and you need to support the farmers who are trying to do things right. And just make sure your beef is free of antibiotics and growth hormone. Those are used widespread in the big commercial operations. They're just pumping them full of antibiotics and growth hormone, feeding them the GMO corn, treating them inhumanely. And it's just, we have got to get away from that.
And antibiotics, because they're so stressed. I mean, it's just so many.
Well, and the antibiotics fatten them up.
Yes.
That's one way, and they've been doing this for a long time. They figured out that if you gave cows antibiotics, it would fatten them up. And it does the same thing to human beings too, because of the effects on the GI microbiome, which we'll have a podcast on the GI microbiome too, which is one of my favorite topics. So that's the beef with beef. Okay.
Okay. Can we go back to plants before we get off this page? Otherwise I'll lose it.
Well,
we really didn't cover the plant-based proteins.
We're going to.
Okay. Sorry.
They're listed there. Not on this page, but
got you.
They're coming.
I'll come back.
I assure you. So the next topic is fish and seafood, and fish is one of those things that there's a lot of fraud in the industry. Certain fishes are being sold as different things, and the quality of the fish is lacking, and so they'll inject dyes into the fish to make it look like it's supposed to look, especially the farm raised stuff, and you can really
they're actually putting the dye in the feed, and then they eat the feed, and that makes it look like it's wild, but it's not.
So if you're going to choose a fish, it's best to choose a wild caught fish, a fish that is consuming their natural diet and living in their normal habitat.
Yep, a lower on the food chain is better. So your top apex predators like a swordfish or a shark or the large tuna are going to have a lot more mercury, where your smaller fish, that's why most of your supplements like your fish oils are made from anchovy or krill, because they're at the bottom of the food chain. Mackerel's good, but regular mackerel, not king mackerel. King mackerel's a high predator. In the middle would be something like mahi-mahi. Halibut is still decent because of the way they feed. A lot of your shellfish are still good.
Right.
And a lot of people just don't like herring and anchovies and things like that.
Sardines, or they're really strongly
I love them, but
fishy.
you hate me when I open the can.
I can tell. I'm just like, why? Take it outside if you're going to eat that stuff, please.
But salmon is one of the most readily available. It's a pretty well regulated industry, so they're harvesting sustainably for the most part. You like king salmon, of course, because it's the most expensive. No, it does taste the best. It's a good one. But all the salmon is very healthy. It doesn't matter if it's the cheap. If you're on a budget, the pink salmon is very nutritious. The chum salmon is very nutritious. The coho is delicious and nutritious. The sockeye, which is the red colored, is nutritious. And the king, which is the largest, is delicious. A little harder to find here in Arkansas. I guess it depends on the demographic and where they ship it in. But beware of the farm raised, because they'll just say sustainably.
That's a good that's a good sign that it's not.
Is it sustainably caught or sustainably raised?
Right.
And we are what we eats, and they're feeding them a subgrade food with food dye in order to make it look like the wild caught. It is not a good protein.
And tilapia especially, I think is probably, it's just a poor quality.
It's a cichlid, which means cichlids is a type of fish that it's a mouth breeder. Is what defines them, but they can feed through their gills also. So it's very easy to give them sewage, which makes the algae bloom, and then they filter that green slime that you see in water. They can actually feed off of that. And so there's a lot of unscrupulous people who will use raw sewage, either animal or human. I know China's been caught doing this, and they're shipping it over here. It's very inexpensive. There is no place to get wild caught tilapia.
Does not exist.
There are some places in South Florida and South Texas that raise tilapia. That'd be a little bit better. But it's the same as the farm-raised catfish or the farm-raised tilapia. They don't have the omegas. In fact, the only catfish that has a lot of omegas is the flathead, because it consumes smaller fish, where the channel cat and the blue cat are more bottom feeders.
Right. And then, of course, the fattier the fish, the more omega-3 fatty acids it's going to be in that fish. And I think we've kind of touched on this, but the best sources are going to be your anchovies, herring, mackerel, salmon, black cod, sardines, trout, bluefin tuna. But again, you have to understand.
Bluefin would have the mercury.
The older the fish, the more likely it is to have more mercury contamination.
So if you like tuna, especially canned tuna, there's one called light, not white, but light tuna. This is the skipjack, which is a small tuna. And it happens to also be the least expensive, which is nice. Right. But it is by far has the least amount of mercury compared to your albacore or your other types of tuna. And your sushi grade tuna, those are all the apex predators. So that's high in mercury. Right. And most of those now actually are being farm raised. I didn't know you could farm raise tuna, but they are in the Mediterranean. And the Japanese absolutely hate it. They say it's dog food.
Good. And then, of course, freshwater fish have some omega-3s, like you mentioned, the flathead catfish. But you've got to be cognizant of potential pollutants, whether it's a river, ocean, stream.
Well, even our lakes here, we have a lot of crystal mines around where we live, and there's a lot of arsenic and mercury in the water.
A lot of mining. Yep. Wherever there's a lot of mining that takes place, that's going to leach into your water, and you need to be
in Colorado.
aware of that.
In Colorado, there's a couple of lakes that have limits that do not eat the fish because of the high selenium content. And then I've also caught trout in Colorado at the high mountain lakes. They're very pure, and they're eating a lot of freshwater shrimp. Their flesh is almost red. So you can kind of tell the fattier fish. It'll have a color to it. Mm-hmm. And that's why your salmon has color. That's why they call it ruby red trout. But again, there's farm raised ruby red trout. Guess what? They're feeding it dyes to make it ruby red. So it's almost impossible to find the ruby red wild caught.
You really have to. It's unfortunate you have to spend so much time to vet the sources. But that's, I do know the Game and Fish Commission, I know here in Arkansas will often provide data about the water quality of the lakes in your area. So if you're a big fisherman, or if you want to go fishing somewhere in Arkansas, you can always just check out and see what, might be going on in that lake.
And your non-omega, your fishes that don't have as much fat, as long as they don't have the mercury, are still excellent sources of protein. Right. I mean, so there's nothing wrong with those.
They're just better.
Well, for the health reasons, but
Yeah.
I love fish. I don't mind eating a lot of bass and crappie that are,
Oh, no, I like it too.
and most lakes are not that polluted. So just check your lake. Just depends on where you're located. We just happen to be in an area where there's a lot of crystal mines, therefore there's the leaching. But much of the country is not an issue.
Right.
If you're downstream of a coal plant, then often a lot of times you have problems there.
Right.
So there are reports. EWG.org would have a lot of information that also. We often mention that website as a source of
I would
contaminants
be
and things.
leery of anything from the Mississippi River, which is
Oh, yeah, no.
where I was raised. I remember going fishing on the Mississippi River with my dad on the sandbars many times. And Dad would skin those fish, fillet them, and fry them up for dinner that night. I'm just like, oh, how much nasty stuff did we consume?
Yeah, especially in Helena, which is pretty far south. The
Right.
further north you get, it's better.
Right.
But there are rivers like the White River. We fish there, and it doesn't have as much industrial pollutants. Believe it or not, the Arkansas is not that, even though it's a huge river, it doesn't go through that many cities. So it's not as bad as, say, the Mississippi or other ones that are, especially any river in the Northeast, is going to have a lot of
Right.
contaminants.
And so let's see here, poultry. Let's talk about some poultry next. So
Okay.
I think most people, you've seen free range on the package, right? So that's good. The chickens are having free range, but what does that mean?
Very little. So here's the deal, is that everything, we've become accustomed to a type of chicken that has an enormous breast, very little legs. There's several different species that have been cross-raised to make those. They're not genetically modified. They're just crossed. They basically created chickens that have insatiable appetites. I've raised a lot of them. I did some things to manipulate them to make them a little healthier by basically limiting their feed so they'd have to grow less over a longer period of time. I did experiments where I'd actually just feed them all the time, and they died with around 10 to 12 weeks. They ate themselves to death and they had cardiac arrest. That's what you're getting. So when they say free range,
Sorry, I'm just picturing
so
a chicken having a cardiac.
well, you can tell because their legs stick straight out. So I mean,
You have a little AED on standby.
no, you can just tell because their legs stick out. It's actually a trait that they have, and their legs just stick straight out when they have it.
Bless their hearts.
But they, the cob and the rock cross will just eat themselves to death, and you are what you eat.
And don't they feed them something that destroys their thyroid
Well,
gland?
they used to with arsenic,
Yeah.
and they don't typically do that anymore. There may be a couple unscrupulous, but Tyson just got busted again for quote free range, and they had one little door for 10,000 birds, and it's they just bend the rules so much. But it really comes down to, we traditionally did not eat a lot of poultry. Poultry was raised for eggs. The old hens, as they were called, were used for soups, and the old roosters, you may have heard of a French dish called coq au vin. It's delicious. That means cock and wine. They're
Right.
taking the old rooster. That's the reason they use the wine. Traditionally, we didn't eat a lot of poultry, but Tyson changed that with the rock cross. It can be raised in 6 weeks,
Wow.
from egg to harvest in six and a half weeks.
That's crazy. And
And-
I think the old hens, what was it, called Jewish penicillin?
Yes.
Because they made a soup out of them. And
Right. And you can tell, with the older hens, and it takes a couple of years to achieve that. When they want to cull them, their fat's actually orange. So it takes time to develop the nutrients. So the chicken you're getting in the store is 6 to 7 weeks old. It's been fed a corn diet. Even if they say free range, it's not. Poultry is just not a great protein.
the eggs are a much better source
And there's so many people.
of nutrients.
And there's people near you that will raise themselves. There's no reason to buy it commercially. So many people raise eggs now.
Our neighbors.
And you
do.
can tell a good egg because the egg yolk will be orange, not yellow, and the whites will be firm. When you put them in the skillet, they don't spread all the way out. They actually stay egg shaped.
Yeah.
And you can tell then and the shell will be hard. That means they're getting lots of calcium. So that's a good protein source for the eggs. And then if you want to, at the end of, typically they quit laying around second year, and you have to wait to the third year they start laying again. That's why a lot of people cull them and they do pullets to take their place. Those are the good ones for soups and things.
Yeah.
I've raised heirlooms, which are the traditional slow raising chickens, and you can raise them for eggs. They don't produce as much eggs, but they do good. And you can slaughter them, say, around 20 weeks, 25 weeks. That's why no one raises them, because it commercially, no one wants to spend $20, $25 for a chicken. But if you have 25 weeks in an animal, by the time you clean it and stuff, you're still not making anything.
I know.
So, but they do sell natural grocers where you are. They sell a heirloom.
Oh yeah, that's a really good one.
Well, but the little one is air chilled, where all the Tyson birds and Purdue birds are water chilled. So that's why when you cook them, the meat's mushy.
Right.
And then the heirlooms are frozen. They don't sell as many of them, but they don't taste the way you're used to it. I mean, it's a tougher bird. But that's what it takes to get the nutrients. They cannot develop the nutrients that make them a healthy thing for us in 6 to 7 weeks.
And they're just pumping them full of growth hormone and antibiotics as well. Yeah. And you are consuming that yourself. Most of the antibiotics that are being used today are being used in animals, not humans,
right?
In animals.
And you can get ones that are not GMO. Not antibiotics or hormones. So those are available, but most of them are still being fed a GMO grain,
which you are then consuming a GMO.
Yeah, and then I have farmer friends who raise chickens, and they do like the chicken tractors, but it's still not the same. You have
which allows them to move
about a foot,
because
they put one bird per square foot, as opposed to the chicken houses have them just crammed in, and they move the cages a couple times, but a day. But even then, the clover's gone in like the first 10 seconds. So when I've raised them, I've had large enclosures with electric fence, put food on one side, water on the other, eliminated the food at 2:00, did all the things, and you've tasted them. They are a lot better, but it's still not the same as a 25-week-old heirloom. Right. So use chicken as a protein. You're not going to get the other nutrients that you think. Stick with the eggs, and then
right. And chickens are omnivores. A lot of people don't realize that. They eat.
Oh, yeah. They'll eat themselves.
Everything. Yeah, they'll eat each other.
But we talk about ancestral eating. We did not eat a lot of poultry 100 years ago. Not like, it's crazy how much poultry we eat now. 100 years ago, once a month maybe, again, when they were culling a rooster or a hen was when we ate it.
They were eating the eggs.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about the eggs, and then we'll go back to the pork. But so your eggs need to come from high quality chickens that are
completely free range,
no antibiotics, growth hormones, or GMO feed. That is going to give you the best quality egg.
Yeah, they're not eating grass and clover and things like that. It's not high quality. So even if it's a nice chicken pen, but it's all dirt, and even if you feed it non-GMO grain, that's better than the other because they're not stressed at least. Right. But they really need to be free range where they're walking all day long, picking, eating bugs, eating clover, eating vetches, and that's what produces the good eggs. And there are people who do that.
Yeah. In my opinion, eggs are they're more nutritious than the chicken from which they came.
Yeah. And you think about it, you'll be like, oh, I'm not going to spend $5 a dozen. That's 6 servings of protein.
That is some high quality protein.
It's less than $1 a serving of protein.
I don't think people appreciate the nutrient density of an egg.
No,
if they did,
it's a miracle food.
They would have no problem paying that. But I would say if you can get you some chicken, raise some chickens, or go in with a neighbor and raise some chickens, you should definitely do it.
Yeah,
and they're fun to watch too.
And get some dogs that won't kill them. Yeah. That's the big problem.
That is a problem.
Yeah.
Eggs supply not only high quality, complete protein, but they provide other nutrients like omega-3 fatty acids, choline, vitamin D, selenium, vitamin B2, phosphorus, and cholesterol. These are all wonderful things that your body needs to function properly. Okay, and they're very filling. I have a problem with eggs.
I don't.
I love them, but they do not love me. And there's a lot of other people like me too. Me and the eggs don't get along, and I hate that. So what about pork? So
it's hard to get a good source of pork because one, they're not a good conversion. Like chickens, the reason Tyson and Purdue went chicken is that it has a good conversion rate. The highest conversion rate is tilapia, the fish we've talked about. And that's why it's such a popular one. I mean, you can feed it 1.5 pounds and it puts on a pound. I mean, it's crazy, the conversion rate. Chickens are a decent conversion. Pork is not a good conversion. And that's why we have friends who raise grass-fed beef and they do the chicken tractor pasture poultry, but their pork, they still feed a GMO grain. He said you could not afford to feed it because their conversion is not very good. And by the time you feed them out, and pork,
People aren't going to pay what
no,
it's going to be required to pay for them to make a profit.
and when you say, they call it woodland pork, the reason is they ruin a pasture. So they like grass, but they will root it up, and I don't care how many rings you put in their nose. You have to look like a millennial, I guess.